Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. I'm delighted to have Mark Stahlman back. And today, we're going to be talking about the new Pope and the implications for digital Catholic social teaching. So, welcome, Mark.
It's really fun to be back talking with you again, Shrikant. I went back through the archives a bit, and we really did a lot of sessions together for a while there. And then a bunch of things changed in both of our lives.
Yes.
But it's wonderful. And thank you again for inviting me back.
Wonderful. All right. So, Mark, I think all of us are wondering, what does this new Pope Leo XIV mean for us as a world, as to the Catholic Church. And you have studied the church longer than most, almost anybody I know. So would love to hear your thoughts.
Like the rest of the world, the Roman Catholic Church is at a turning point. Now, you're correct. I'm a practicing Catholic, and I have even gone to Rome on a few occasions. And I've even tried from a distance to have some interesting conversations there. But that struck me, as it has for many other people, to be somewhat futile. As you might imagine, a medieval institution, the pomp and circumstance associated with the funeral and the conclave, you've got these fellows walking around in medieval or Renaissance costumes, carrying long spears, and then you have this whole secret balloting operation. It does seem not modern in many ways, but as a bureaucratic organization, particularly a bureaucratic organization run in Rome by a large group of people, typically called a curia, it has felt over the course of the last few years, in our own and other people's, we've compared notes with other people, it's felt as if it was closed, really fundamentally uninterested in new ideas. Francis was brought in, I believe. There are many versions of the Francis story, but my version of the Francis story is that his predecessor, Benedict XVI, or B16 as we sometimes shorthand him, it turns out that he was an anomaly in many regards. Benedict was is remembered as a theologian, as a relatively frail man, as a man who was very close to his predecessor, John Paul II, wrote many encyclicals for him, but really did not want to be Pope. So that was built into that situation, and it was a mess. Everybody knew it. And so he was kind of easy to beat up on. So Francis became the tough guy, the enforcer. But many folks may not recall is that Francis put himself through chemical engineering college, in part, at least, as a bouncer in the port of Buenos Aires, bar bouncer. And that, of course, is not something that you take lightly. It's a dangerous job. And so I have, maybe jokingly, maybe not, over the years described Francis as a thug. And now, of course, there's a great deal of commentary about him. But and I'm not endorsing this particularly, but the fact that a book could appear and a discussion could appear around the whole theme of dictator pope, I think is self-serving on the part of the author and the people around the author, but nonetheless, it enters into the conversation. So I've long had the view, based on my contacts in Rome, that nobody liked Francis. So Francis was a breakthrough character who alienated basically everybody. And these are the stories that are coming out of Argentina now and so forth. So whatever Francis might have wanted to accomplish in sweeping terms, most importantly for me, of course, is the reconciliation or recognition of the effects of the technology changes that are ongoing. And I know that that was a concern for Francis, but he didn't have an audience willing to listen because there was so much else going on, and he had pissed a lot of people off. So here we have the kinder, gentler Francis. He doesn't shoot from the hip. He reads from a prepared statement, but he's also very active on X. So apparently his X postings are attracting some very interesting attention as he very quickly moves into broader commentary. So Francis was the tough guy, and Leo is the negotiator. And in fact, one of his recent X posts closes with the sentence, "So now it's time to negotiate." He doesn't explain exactly what's going to be negotiated. His audience is obviously internal to the church, particularly at this stage. But it's very interesting the way this is all lining up. So the personalities are starkly different. The circumstances of their elections are very different. And yet I think they both represent a very significant turn, which is not just happening in the church.
Go ahead. Can you elaborate on that part?
Sure.
What turn do you see, and what please elaborate.
Well, and something I recently wrote, I paraphrased or stole a phrase from Karl Marx. Karl Marx in the German Ideology, published initially in 1845, has the famous line, "There's a specter haunting Europe," by which he means him and communism and so forth. Well, the specter that is haunting the world today is obviously artificial intelligence. And we can get into a discussion about what's real and what's fake. Most of what we hear in the news, of course, is fake. So there's a lot to say there, but to have somebody come in and highlight that immediately, you know the guy's in touch with something, and the specter that is haunting the world is the robot revolution. And it is real and it is fake at the same time, which is usually what happens with these technology issues. But my sense is that he's in touch with what's real. And I say that in part because I was very fortunate to meet the man who has been widely discussed in the press. There's no secret about this. But he was selected by Francis. He's a Franciscan monk in Rome. His name is Benatti. And I got a chance to talk to him. And it's a half an hour long conversation, brought together by mutual friends. And I was really impressed by him. So I know that Francis had around him people who in my estimation, are very sensitive to and very well comprehensively even thoughtful about what's going on here, because I got a chance to talk to the fellow. Well, he's got a new boss. And um, I have not spoken to him since the conclave, so I could be wrong. He may have moved on to some other role, but I sort of doubt it. So my sense is that Francis was winding up the clock, and the spring was getting tighter and tighter. At the time that I spoke with Father Benatti, he was not very optimistic, because under the Francis reign of terror, as some would characterize it, he didn't have a left wing, he didn't have a right wing, nobody liked him, nothing would get done. And so that was the attitude in that conversation. I'm looking forward to speaking to him again when the dust settles here a little bit. But I frankly will be surprised if he hasn't changed his view. Now, some important stuff can get done.
Let's jump forward. Let us keep aside for a moment what can happen, what this particular organization under the new head can do. What do you think it should do, or what do you think what is possible? Because the world has clearly changed dramatically.
Yeah, well, as you've recognized in your own personal life, and as so many others have, you really got to have morality to approach these questions.
Mhm.
So um, a world that is limited to ethics, a world that it is limited in so many ways to, in particular, modern ethics, will not be able to deal with AI.
Mhm.
Cannot. So you need moral authority to deal with this. Now, as we all know, nobody is free of sin, and that includes the Pope. There's not a moment you could imagine that he would not recognize that. But we can in fact negotiate. We can in fact discuss. We can in fact identify what's most important here. And I think that what is most important is moral leadership. Obviously, political institutions have lost moral authority. In general, business has lost that authority. There's lots of interesting data available online about trust, and it's terrible. Nobody really gets much trust anymore. Not saying that the church doesn't have its detractors, as it should, and its own historic problems. But I think we've moved far enough away from the child abuse issues. Not that they will disappear altogether, but that they're not going to be strong enough to undermine the moral authority of Leo XIV. And so, while there's a vast array of other specifics, which I'm happy to go through in terms of this, let me just the phrase because I'm just here briefly just to introduce myself. I am the president of the Center for the Study of Digital Life, but we have a number of projects, and there's a bunch of people who were involved with us. And one of the more common refrains, particularly on our Substack. So if you're interested in other versions of what you're hearing tonight, exogenous, EXOGENOUS.substack.com. What a marvelous website Substack is for this sort of stuff. There's a lot of posts there. There's hundreds of people who are reading the stuff, not yet thousands. That's just fine. But the net of this is, if you've got a moral authority who has the benefit of the doubt in terms of the people around him, and has the personality such that he can take on that mantle of authority. So remembering here that Francis didn't wear the red slippers, Francis didn't sleep in the Vatican. He slept in a guest house. He didn't wear the same clothes, which is a part of the whole authority exercise. Leo is going to do this as an authority. He already is doing it as an authority. So the most important thing he can do is be the moral authority that actually understands the underlying issues and can put them in context. This has never happened, and in fact, probably there's no other way that it could happen. If you try to limit, you're not going to get a Hollywood star who's going to help you on this. Their credibility is totally shot. Technology leaders, in many people's view, have blown their credibility. So here we have something quite unique, and therefore extremely important, because the phrase that I'm pointing to here is we're compelled to ask ourselves, what does it mean to be human? As soon as you start trying to build artificial humans, AI, particularly all of these fantastic stories about artificial general intelligence, AGI, and all the other initials, it's impossible for the people who are doing the work, but more importantly, the people who are surrounding the work, it's impossible for them not to ask the question, okay, this is a fake human, so what's a real human? And the answer to what a real human is, of course, is something that requires moral authority to answer that question. So there's a whole expanding cloud of moral authority that surrounds Leo XIV, coming at a quite remarkable time, and I think with great promise.
What is the significance of this choice of the name that he has?
Well, every pope has his ticket to ride, so to speak. And Leo XIII was a quite remarkable pope. End of the 19th century. A couple of the distinguishing characteristics of Leo XIII are that his brother became deeply involved in teaching St. Thomas Aquinas and had a small school actually devoted to that, indicating that the church had sort of lost its, following the First Vatican Council in 1870. The church it painted itself into a corner in a variety of ways. And so Leo is the one who sort of opened up the doors and windows. In addition to bring Thomas Aquinas back, which he did in an encyclical, and it didn't have the impact that he hoped it would, because the church had not been paying attention for too long. It had fallen out of favor, and there are various other currents. And to be fair, don't need to belabor this, but I can answer questions about it. The Jesuits were kicked out of the church and then brought back into the church, and had become enormously powerful and important inside the church. And so that was a real difficulty in that time period. But Leo in 1891 published his encyclical Rerum Novarum. And this is with the word labor, capital and labor, in the subtitle of the encyclical. So this was the Catholic Church trying to deal with this enormously complicated but powerful socialist, communist, Marxist, and many others. We forget how many there were and how tumultuous this whole thing was. So he is the man who started the view about Catholic social teaching in a very simple fashion, but a very powerful encyclical. So the notion that the church should weigh in on these social issues had not been the approach up until then. So he really is establishing a new pattern. Instead of the papal infallibility decree from the First Vatican Council, instead of various lists of heresies and errors and prohibited books lists and so forth. So the church was fighting the modern world. And I'm not saying that Leo embraced it. I'm saying that Leo jumped over all of this and put that controversy behind him, and then moved forward. So he is a significant transitional figure. So to have a century plus later, someone pick up that name, apparently quite deliberately, with some pre-thinking about this, if the other interviews can be believed. He knows that he's a transitional figure. So he's put himself in the lineage. As it turns out, in media ecological, if you will, terms, Leo XIII was dealing with the shift to electric media that was happening in the late 19th century. He wasn't aware of it in those terms, but we can now look back on that time period and say he's the first electric pope. And you can't be a part of the world if you're not a part of the world. And so this whole conflict with modernism and so forth, which has absorbed so much energy over the last century, that was the introduction of electricity and what happened broadly in the world as a result of that. Obviously, the church did not succeed in whatever plans it had and has shrunk in size and so forth since then. But we're in another transition now. So I believe the reason why he picked that name, outside of other considerations, and in particular for Catholics who may be on the screen here, or who will be listening to this, it's very hard to not at least consider the meaning and reality of the Holy Ghost intervening in human history, which is how it's supposed to work, as the Catholics believe this. So this is a historic development that needs to be much better understood and assisted. I think the most important thing we can do is to help him accomplish those goals.
Thank you. So what you're saying is that Leo XIII is taking, is coming when Industrial Revolution is already kind of taken off and is really changing the world. So he is the one, he's the electric pope. So now we have got, the internet and the AI. So in that sense, Leo XIV is the first digital pope. So what would you say? What does a digital pope look like? What can he do? What are the possibilities here?
What he can do, I hope, because he has the resources to do this, is to convene discussions, to bring people together in various meetings and so forth. And he can do this from the standpoint that he actually understands many of the fundamentals of what's going on here. If I had not had conversations with the man who performed that role for Pope Francis, I would not be nearly as enthused as I am. But the fact that it has been so difficult to get, I'll give you an example. As we've talked about in many of our earlier conversations, Marshall McLuhan winds up being an important and quite unique. It's not like there's 100 of them. There's Marshall and his son Eric. Marshall was a Catholic convert. Eric is birth Catholic, was birth Catholic. Neither of them are with us anymore. But never has there been a proper reception of the McLuhans in Rome. Now, if you didn't try to do it yourself, if you didn't get into the conversations with the various players and the heads of various departments and universities and so forth, and spend time in Rome walking around talking about this, you wouldn't know this. But I'm not saying that nobody in Rome knows who Marshall McLuhan is. Of course they do. But has he been taken seriously? No. Has he been given an official welcome? No. Is he among the people who you can put a footnote that points towards him? No. He never got received in that sense by the church. Likewise, another very important character, German theologian Romano Guardini, very well known in books about him and so forth. He's not a mystery. So the church has many things to say about him, but they miss a very important part of Guardini. And Guardini is unique, as far as I can tell, in this regard as well. Guardini spent a great deal of time and effort talking about the impact of technologies on society and on humanity. In fact, we, the Center for the Study of Digital Life, and one of our projects, our publishing project, Die Noeticon, we are about to publish on our website, and we'll get to the paper version of it and so forth along the way, a multilingual translation of a 1959 speech given by Guardini, the title of which is The Machine and Man. And it's short. It's very much to the point. It doesn't layer things up and make things difficult for you, but we thought it would be good to have it translated into your own native language. So that's in process as well. And so the church has resources to bring to bear on these problems. McLuhan and Guardini are the ones that I would highlight, but there are certainly others. And there'll be disagreements. But let's get this out into the open. I mean, we've had various approaches which because government tends to think in regulatory terms. So there have been a variety of efforts to regulate AI. And a lot of time and effort gets wasted on that whole exercise. That is not the way to start this whole effort out. The way to start this whole thing out is indeed to answer the question, what does it mean to be human? A real human, not an artificial human. And the resources available, organizations can be formed, events can be pulled together, and all of this can tremendously elevate conversation that has been, either driven by narratives that are linked to stock prices and various financial considerations, or regulatory regimes like the European AI Act and so forth. So those who have been wrestling with the question of AI that I'm aware of, and I'm pretty up to date on what's been going on here, have brought their own agendas, bringing their own behaviors into the whole situation. Very little knowledge is being generated in the process. A lot of people are busy. Some of them are getting paid, but we need so much more than that. We need a higher level moral conversation.
Let me kind of step back and look at kind of people at large. You made an observation about what happened to the church with the advent of the Industrial Revolution.
Right.
What happened to the Catholic Church in the digital age? Church as such, with not the leadership of the church, but church as such.
It turns out that the most number of adult baptisms ever has just happened in the French church. It turns out that traditional Latin Mass, which Francis tried to step in front of for a variety of reasons, I think having to do with concerns about schismatics and so forth. The church services are packed. France is a particularly interesting example here because, as you know, might know, since the early 20th century, I don't know if it was the Third or the Fourth Republic, but it wasn't the current Fifth Republic. The Constitution was written to say there is no such thing as religion. That, in fact, from a standpoint of the French Republic, we're not going to recognize that. There's lots of stories that I could tell about the sides of all that, but France was always considered, if you will, to be the first daughter of the church in the way some people phrase this. So France has been a real problem for the church, and it is now under digital conditions. The trends that were so negative now appear to be reversing. Now, I don't think there's a good way to get that in the U.S. situation. The U.S., of course, is not a Catholic country. It's a Protestant country, but so you can look at a number of other behaviors here. But my sense is that around the world, particularly in the missionary component of the church, digital is bringing people into the church, is rising interest in what the church is doing. So whereas the printing press was terrible for the church, ultimately, the electric paradigm made it even worse. The church was obviously on the losing side of the historic trends. I think it's already evident over the course of the past 5+ years that something is going right for the church, so to speak, and it's being recognized inside the church. But the statistics in France of baptisms and conversions and so forth is probably in terms of where people keep numbers, the easiest place to see that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Let's talk about Catholic social teaching.
Sure.
Digital Catholic social teaching. So could you
Sure. To begin with Leo XIII, and then the man who took this up later, 40 years later, as a matter of fact, in an encyclical entitled Quadragesimo Anno, 40 years. The encyclicals are all titled in Latin, first word capitalized, not the second word. So they don't, in a sense, they don't have a title. They just start the first couple of words of the text, wind up being the title. the three components of the original version, and it is very important to note that there are multiple components and they interrelate with each other. Very important to recognize that the way Catholics think about this stuff is not to make a list. Catholics think about these things as, how do I discern the components of a dynamic totality? The three primary components of the original version, there are subsequent versions that make different emphasis, are first of all, the dignity of the human person. That tends to be one that has been bounced around the basketball court probably the most, human dignity. But it winds up suffering from an important problem, which is the lack of a clear definition of psychology by the church, which I can describe in some more detail later. Secondly, a very important principle, which, remember, these principles go together. They don't operate one by one by one. The second principle is subsidiarity. And subsidiarity is, for those who have looked at it, the dictionary definition of it is basically decisions are taken at the lowest possible level. You can expand that to say that responsibilities are redistributed in society as a result of this. As it turns out, historically, probably the place where subsidiarity got its greatest application is in the formation of the European Union. So the Maastricht Treaty and subsequent treaties have all explicitly used the word subsidiarity. So it turns out after World War II, Catholic economists brought this into the shaping of Europe. So the whole formation of Europe after World War II has this overtone. And if you went out to look at literature on subsidiarity, a lot of it would wind up being EU specific. So subsidiarity means you don't have, unless it's needed to make decisions, you don't have a bureaucracy, a hierarchy. You don't have a deep state. You don't have any of those sorts of structures. You might have a king, possibly, depending on how things are put together, but they're not going to be able to do very much. Most of what happens will be decentralized. Now, it turns out that overall, digital technology decentralizes. It turns out that overall, the Catholic Church is on a, as was reinforced by Leo XIV immediately, a focus on something called synodality, which, regardless of how it's, forgetting about how it's actually implemented, which could be good, bad, and different. And recently under Francis, a pretty bad job was done on this whole thing. But nonetheless, it's a decentralization. It's a pushing out of decisions to the levels where they need to be made. If a particular parish needs to make a decision because of their own circumstances and the people involved, they should be able to make decisions within certain boundaries, of course. That might lead to fragmentation, all depending on how this plays out. But number one, human dignity. Number two, subsidiarity, which has already been tried out and proven in many regards. And third, solidarity, which feeds into a whole other set of narratives. And so there have been attempts to cleave them off. Solidarity can be something that you can cleave off into a kind of a left-wing, almost even a one world sort of exercise. Don't do that. Take all three of them together. Add a couple more if you want to, but it was really a quite remarkable breakthrough. And my recommendation, again, if you're going to read up on this, is to take a look at Quadragesimo Anno from Pius XI. All of course, easily available online.
Thank you. And we did an entire series on the digital Catholic social teaching, which is
It's quite a series, as a matter of fact. It's all still there on YouTube.
yes,
8 hour plus long sessions and
yes.
playlists and a very bunch of other things. So uniquely, in fact, what we have done on digital Catholic social teaching, because the three encyclicals, the original Rerum Novarum, 40 years later and 100 years later with St. John Paul II, none of that was digital.
Mhm.
There was no recognition that we were going to do this again. They were all somehow trying to grapple with the electric modern world. We don't live in that world anymore. The modern world is now behind us. I'm not saying that we are in any of the ways people have tried to define postmodern, all of which have their problems. But certainly the most common definitions of postmodern are just a sort of worse version of modern, as if it could actually get worse, but it did. All of that's behind us now. Digital is a discontinuity, shifting from centralized mass media audiences to much more decentralized at every level. And this has been going on for years now already. So I think that there's enough evidence out there that this has already been happening. But the identification of digital technology as a cause of all of this requires that you understand a lot more than many do about causality. But if you're willing to take that all in hand and view digital not as the way it typically gets described superficially in most of the accounts, but try to think of the deeper implications of this. This is exactly where Leo XIV is going. I'm quite confident is going to take us. I've been trying to think: is there anything that could stop him? And given his personality, given the reception that he's gotten, given all the rest of the factors involved here, he's going to try to get this accomplished, or get very heavily bruised in the process.
So let me ask you about digital version of these three principles.
Yeah.
How do the principles of dignity, the human dignity, subsidiarity, and solidarity apply in the digital paradigm?
Well, we've moved into a quite remarkable situation since the one world government globalism situation has now collapsed. So most of the population of the earth before digital were sort of locked into these United Nations style total. It replaced colonialism with something worse. Replaced colonialism, which was fragmented in many ways, and beneficial and not beneficial in many ways, but replaced it with a kind of a technocratic, overarching organization. It was already clear in the 50s and 60s that there was a small group of people who appeared to run the show, and so that is part of the reason why trust is so low. So under electric conditions, human beings were treated, because the psychology of that era treated human beings as if they were computers. That's cognitive psychology. And treated them as if they were all under the thumb of one of a massive global elite of some sort, with meetings like the Bilderberger Group and Davos and so forth. So we were in an era in which there appeared to be a global elite, minimizing greatly the national aspirations of the population of the earth, minimizing the ability for people to get out from underneath sort of planned and limited economic participation. All kinds of restrictions came with that globalist exercise. It's gone now. So the human being's dignity wound up becoming a self-help sort of situation, wound up becoming all kinds of varieties of psychologies that missed the boat, and an increasingly stressed out, mentally unhealthy population. It didn't benefit us in any. It diminished, in fact, human dignity significantly. Caricatured it. Intersectionality and that whole process is not done by healthy people with a strong mental sense of what it means to be human. Instead, they belong to this, that, or the other category that need to be intersected. That's what electricity did to us in terms of human dignity. It crushed it in many ways. How can a human be dignified if they are viewed as being susceptible to manipulation, susceptible to being programmed, brainwashed, however you wish to describe it? No, the human beings almost disappeared in a certain sense under the electric conditions. That is all gone now. That is not going to be tolerated. The way this shows up in terms of national ambitions is important. If you had a chance, you might think that Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar, since they're all right next to each other and they're all apparently Arab states, they would all be the same. They seem to wear more or less the same clothes. But if you took the chance to listen to any of those welcoming ceremonies, some very important, significant to the people involved differences showed up. So we have digitals. So just remember here, these are digits. That's not a digit, but these are digits. And I'm not going to lift my foot off the ground, but each of the appendage on the foot is considered digits. So what digital actually means, and this is something I'd encourage everybody to try on from time to time. Etymology turns out to be very important. The origins of words turn out to be very important. And to call something digital means inherently it's going to fragment. Has to do that. There will be very few universalizing forces, which is another reason why the role of the church is so important, because the world is already highly fragmented. What we need to do is figure out how to work together while remaining not all the same as each other. That's human dignity. And that's going on at a personal, at a group, and very obviously at a national level right now. So that's the shift that's going on in terms of human dignity. Subsidiarity is a very rich opportunity. The total amount of work being done on alternate political structures, alternate economic structures is really quite phenomenal. And not in any way just limited to Western European or American efforts. So it's a reasonable question to ask. Can the Communist Party of China survive this? I have had some experience in that regard. I will tell you that as an attendee at the second World Congress on Marxism at Peking University, where I was a few years ago, I had the opportunity. There are now schools of Marxism throughout the entire educational system. Chinese education is fascinating. They're about to introduce AI teaching all the way through the elementary schools, starting after the summer. But they're also teaching religious classics all the way through their educational system. So this is they're not bathing the kids in Marxism anymore. As it turns, they're bathing them in Chinese tea at this point, along with AI tea. Quite remarkable, quite well planned out. And I think those who have pointed out that President Trump's deliberate introduction of uncertainties could be thought of as probably the best way for him to deal with China, because China plans everything. And you start introducing uncertainties into the situation, and the plan don't work anymore. So whether that's a factor here or not, I can't tell. There are obviously many explanations for why people like Trump do things that they do. But the whole question of devolving, decentralizing, the whole point of pushing decisions down to lower levels, this is not the way the previous paradigm worked at all. Ultimately, the previous paradigm was based on mass media, and mass media needs mass audiences and so forth. So it was all about eyeballs, all about aggregations, and that's behind us now. So subsidiarity, in a certain sense, didn't have a chance, even though it wound up in the process of the United States of Europe. It wound up being necessarily incorporated because of the way it played post-World War II. We're really going to have a lot of experimentation. So one example of that already is, in fact, universities. So the number of efforts that have been launched to establish new universities, we have, in fact, a online graduate school, which has been very interesting for those who've been participating. So the decentralization of digital, separation of the digits from each other, that's not the way electric worked at all. Which is, I'll just give one obvious simple example. So people probably know the etymology of the word fascism. Fascism, of course, was a bundling, a grouping together and kind of forcing everybody into a uniform sort of approach to these things. That's a political corollary to a centralization process. What's going on today is quite the opposite of fascism. Those strings are all being cut. And this is the reason why states have become far more important in terms of U.S. politics. It's the reason why the whole federal system is now being, in some sense, dismantled, or at least much more carefully thought about. So subsidiarity is already working, whatever name people may put to it. And that's a difference between the previous electric and the new digital. Solidarity, of course, solidarity under electric conditions was this whole one world sort of exercise. For security purposes, we need to basically only have one army, so we can't have another world war. Again, centralizing in its whole approach to solidarity. International movements, the Communist International was a perfect electric era sort of exercise. That's not the way things are going now. Solidarity is happening at very different levels, and in particular, the reintroduction of a moral framework, I think will quite differently cast the whole question of solidarity. So in every one of these principles, you could sit down, you could write a chapter of a book on how it worked out. And we kind of did a version of that. And as Shrikant has indicated, I would recommend for those who are interested to go back and listen to the eight session series.
Yes, and if you're watching this on the video, you can find the link to the playlist
Right.
in the comments. Let's look at AI. Just from the point of view of what um, what it is contrasted to, you know. So you've talked a lot about this. So can you elaborate on what does it mean
Sure.
to be human? What is, you know, how just by kind of separating out AI
Right.
from human, how does it help us kind of get back
Well, I'll start
to
with a bit of a historic summary here, and then I'll give you three aspects of AI that are worth considering. Uh, where did the term AI come from? So we're back to word origins here. It turns out that it's quite clear that at a summer workshop at Dartmouth in 1956, um, the man who organized, or one of the organizers, a guy named John McCarthy, he offered the word artificial intelligence. Now, everybody knows that. That part's easy to figure out. What is not so well known, I would think from my own research, I'm pretty good at poking around and figuring things out, but this really took a lot of poking. The people who had that conference they were explicitly called themselves mathematical psychologists. So that wasn't a big group of people at that point. That wasn't a dominant trend in any way in psychological profession. Um, to be a mathematical psychologist in 1956 was a small group of people. They were very they became particularly famous coming out of all of that. But the net of this is it was very clear they were modeling human beings in a mathematical fashion, as if we could treat them as computers that could be programmed, starting in 56. So AI always had that. It's also, as a personal note, it turns out that my father's mentor, who was described to me as my godfather as I was growing up, was Norbert Wiener, the man who coined the term cybernetics. So I'm sort of born into that piece of the situation. And it turns out that he wasn't invited. How do I know that? Well, it turns out that the wife of one of the participants had taken notes and offered her own. So spending a few hours, I did eventually find that. But these guys named artificial intelligence directly in opposition to my godfather, Norbert Wiener. What did Norbert Wiener do to piss them off? And the answer is he wrote a book titled The Human Use of Human Beings. Two separate editions. It was very much well known in the field at that time. So they were trying to take advantage of running him over, build momentum. Wiener was in having troubles at that time. The FBI was on his case and so forth. But so he was weakened, and they tried to crush him. So AI has been a fraud in that sense, a political within that world, fraud in the sense of not really explaining to people what they were trying to do. Um, my guess is at the time this happened, people knew the individuals and what they were trying to do, but it's been forgotten since. Um, so AI has been problematic from the very beginning. So what do we have today? Do we even have artificial intelligence in any meaningful sense? Large language models are qualify, I think, fairly as artificial intelligence, but they are absolutely incapable of doing what they claim they will be able to do. This is no longer, as far as I'm concerned. Forget about the statements by Sam Altman. Forget about all the rest of these press releases and so forth. LLMs are not the way to go. There's a variety of people who come to that conclusion. They have no stock price to worry about, so they can come to that conclusion. But I'll give you an example. A man who I once upon a time was a student of mine. I couldn't make a enormous list of that. Maybe Triview has added a few, maybe more than a few. But guy who once was literally my student is a well-known television based veteran investor by the name of Roger McNamee. So Roger McNamee is in California. He has his own little band. They do covers on the Grateful Dead. So he's a well-known and amusing sort of character. So he was on the other day, and he ripped this whole thing apart. He said, "I'm just waiting for the whole crash and the investment opportunities after all these things," because he said on CNBC, they cannot do what they're promising to do. And I was once a programmer myself. I have kind of retaught myself a little bit with Python to see if I could still construct a program. I can, but so the technology doesn't scare me away. Neural networks don't scare me away. I can read the papers on all of this stuff, and it's not going to work. So if that's AI, which I would suggest is not the ultimate answer, that is an AI which is headed for a very rough time. The Niagara Falls is not very far from where it is now, and they're sitting there in a barrel that they built for themselves. Is that the end of AI? No, absolutely not. So a critic of artificial intelligence, a guy named Gary Marcus, who you may find interesting, he's got a Substack. He wants to combine the old original version of AI, which was not neural networks, but rather symbolic. The problem with AI is it doesn't understand anything. I'm sorry, the problem with LLMs is that they don't understand anything. They don't even try. So what he wants to do is he wants to mix the chocolate with the peanut butter so that we get some symbolic meaning combined with this statistical parrot stuff. I don't think that will answer the question either. I suspect we're going to have to much better understand human beings, which we have given up on understanding, in order to have the breakthrough that everybody, I mean, it is now very commonplace in the larger field of AI, I guess, to answer the broader question that Shrikant originally said. The broader field says we don't have it. We're up against the wall. We're going to need breakthroughs. My suggestion is, if you really want to do this right, then get rid of that old computer analogy for humans and recognize that you're not building a human being, artificial human, you're building something else, and then figure out what that something else is. But be that as it may. So here's 3 areas that I would suggest, Shrikant, we should consider. 3 questions. Can artificial intelligence outsmart human beings? That's the first question. Second question, can artificial intelligence manipulate human beings? Third question, can artificial intelligence can it actually accomplish what it sets out to do, which is to do everything a human can do, but do it better? So I believe the answer to the first question, can we be outsmarted by AI? The answer to that is no. The only way that would be, the problem, of course, is comparing what smart means in both cases, because as many people have noted, what we're calling intelligence for artificial intelligence is certainly not human intelligence. That's not the way that humans work. But I think it's very important to recognize that this is not going to play out, as some have suggested, in the next year or two, except as a giant disappointment. That could happen in the next couple of years. But a giant breakthrough and accomplishment in the next couple of years is quite impossible. Gary Marcus, man I mentioned, who is a critic of AI, says 10 to 20 years. And we'll certainly have something very interesting to look at in 10 or 20 years. It probably won't be what we now think of as artificial intelligence, but it still won't outsmart the humans. Second question, can AI manipulate the humans? The answer to that has to be yes. We have been manipulated by advertising our entire lives. As the advertisers themselves would say, 50% of it works. We just don't know which 50% and so forth. But it works. It turns out the Turing test, which was once promoted as the way we could tell whether we'd solved the Turing test, then boy, we really had gotten artificial intelligence. Well, it turns out the Turing test isn't a test. It's a parlor trick. And it was actually patterned on a Victorian game that people played in their living rooms about whether you could fool people. So that was all about fooling people. And so what are we going to do about that problem? And the answer is we're going to have to stop being so gullible. Now, the fact that nobody trusts anybody by and large today is probably going to help us in that direction. But we have remember, the people who are really going to have to deal with this aren't born yet. The alpha and beta generations, so-called by the marketeers, are going to be very different than certainly we are. I don't know how, don't see most faces here, but my guess is that Shrikant attracts a fairly sophisticated and probably grown-up crowd of people. The people who are going to really have to deal with this and deal with the question of being manipulated, in many cases, are our children or grandchildren ages. So I believe we can improve enormously on the question of manipulation. Third question, are there things that humans really can do that machines will never be able to do? And I think the answer to that is, or putting it in the other way around so I can answer it with a negative. Does it make sense to say we're going to build a machine that can do everything human can do even better? The answer to that is no, it's not. You could only draw that conclusion if you had a very reductive understanding of what it means to be human. If you want to take up the cause of mathematical psychology from the Dartmouth summer workshop, be my guest, but you won't accomplish your own goals by doing that. So these are all the sorts of questions that the church should be able to elevate to a much more serious sort of conversation. There was recently a fairly significant effort. I think it took a couple of years and many meetings. Probably many smart people got involved, but there was a note called Antigua et Nova, old and new, but it chickened out from really grasping these questions. So I guess what I would have to answer here, from what I've seen so far, Leo XIV isn't going to chicken out.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mark. So I'm going to give you the last word. Anything else that you would like to say? What is it that you're focused on? Any comments that you have?
Sure. We have been talking about this paradigm shift to digital for many years now. I would say that it was a difficult conversation to have. I would say that many people didn't think it was very practical. That is now changed. We are finding some very different levels of interest. And by this, I mean paying good money for advisory services. We're finding that shift is accelerating at this point. So Marshall McLuhan was asked once, are you an optimist or a pessimist? Shrikant is smiling because he remembers that the answer is neither. I am an apocalypsist, where apocalypse is another word for revelation. I think there's a lot of people who want to be apocalypsists now. Some of them are freaking out. Some of them have their hair on fire. But the shift in mass media to Substacks and so forth is really quite phenomenal. I was on Wall Street for many years, and I had to read the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and often Investors Business Daily, which is the LA version, as I recall, of the Wall Street Journal. I had to read them all every day and prepare my presentation to the sales force. Who the hell does that anymore? I kind of enjoy reading the Saturday New York Times because it still has something of the character of, we're going to put the stories in here we don't want you to really read. But since we're the newspaper record, we have to put it someplace. So that can be kind of amusing. But the media scape has shifted so dramatically. And Gen Z, which is the youngest in their 20s now, has already exhibited very significant behavior changes compared to before. So I would conclude by saying, with all humility, we were right. The clarity that we are in a paradigm shift, specifically from television to digital, has become a very different conversation over the course of even the past 6 months or a year. So I invite you to join us in that conversation. One place to do that, and you can sign up for free, is exogenous.substack.com. Trivium University is our online graduate school. We're about to start the fourth quarter of the second academic year, which has been about sciences. The motto of the center is New Paradigms, New Sciences, and New Leaders. So apart from the time that you put into it and the effort, TrivU is also free. So we have the number of ways that we can participate together on all of this. And I want to thank you all for your patience and persistence in joining us here tonight.
Thank you very much, Mark. And for those watching on YouTube, all the links that Mark mentioned are there in the comments. Thanks, Mark. Wonderful talking to you again. Bye.
Great to see you, Shreykat. Thanks.
Bye.